welcome everybody to another Community Capital Live. Really excited to have you all in today. I know we got people joining in over the next few minutes. So while people are coming in, I'll go ahead and just give our introduction and overview here, and then we'll get into our discussion today with Jay Nwachu. Really excited to talk to him from Ignite Capital. Just so you know what Ignite Capital is, this is a partnership between a few different organizations and institutions, all focused on community investing, impact investing, and local investing. So this is a collaboration between the Main Street Journal, which is, I think, the place to go if you're interested in local investing. That's kind of your first stop that you should take a look at. The second collaborator here is Neighborhood Economics, which is a conference that convenes social impact investors as well as entrepreneurs and community leaders doing community development work. Really, really cool mix of people at those conferences. I got to go to the one in San Antonio. You should definitely check out Neighborhood Economics Conference. Also Impact Alpha. Kevin has called them the Wall Street Journal for Impact, and we are creating a database of funds as well as this show that's going to be put up with them as we're working that out in the future here. And lastly is the Mindful Marketplace show, which is my show on bizradio.us about social entrepreneurship, community investing, and democratic ownership of businesses. So we're going to get into it here today. I also want to make sure we hit on our panel. Our panel today is Kevin Jones, who is the co-founder of Neighborhood Economics that I mentioned before. He was also the co-founder of SoCap, another impact investing conference, Impact Hub, which was a co-working space network that I loved being a member of back in Salt Lake. And also we have Michael Shuman, who is the author of several books, including Put Your Money Where Your Life Is, Local Dollars, Local Cents. He is also the editor-in-chief, I guess, of the Main Street Journal, which I mentioned earlier. So he'll be joining us shortly. He is finishing up something he had to get out of. So he'll be joining us to ask some questions here, Jay. Format of the show is we're going to talk to Jay for a little bit. Kevin and Michael will both get to dive deep with him on some of their questions. And then as you have questions out there in the audience, go ahead and put them into the chat, or at least let me know in the chat that you have a question. And then when we get near the end, we'll save the last 10, 15 minutes or so for the questions that you all have as well. So Jay, man, thank you for joining us here today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you all for having me. Really appreciate the conversation to be had.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So I kind of want to just hear, like, what was the conditions on the ground that led to the creation of Ignite?
Yeah, sure thing. So it's important to mention that Ignite Capital is an affiliated organization of another organization that I also run called Innovation Works. Innovation Works supports social enterprises in Baltimore City specifically that are working in the same aligned mission of us of closing the racial wealth gap. So social enterprises that are solving problems, creating jobs, and all the things that we want to see to move our economy forward. And then Ignite Capital was created as an affiliated entity to ensure that the capital access for those social enterprises that Innovation Works is supporting is not a myth, right? It's something that actually can be accessible. So there's that interplay there. And then Innovation Works, the first organization, was actually launched in partnership with the Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship out of Santa Clara University. The backstory there is that the Jesuits organizations in Baltimore were looking for ways to be of support to the Baltimore community beyond schools, because Jesuits, we know them very well for schools, the Cristo Reys and the Loyolas, and they were looking for ways to extend their impact and reach in Baltimore. And social entrepreneurship became a topic that came up as one way to do that. Therefore, an exploration of different opportunities and programs across the country. And then they stumbled upon Miller Center that happened to be a Jesuit university, and that's where that partnership came from. So there's this, and that's the history of Ignite Capital to Innovation Works to the Miller Center and the Jesuits and how that played out since 2016, roughly. I will say, but in Baltimore City, speaking of Impact Hub, I was one of the first few members of the impact of when it launched in Baltimore, where there was a bunch of these social enterprise breakfasts happening around that time. This was about 10 years ago at this point. And I remember launching an entity myself then and using Impact Hub as a space for this. And that was my entry point into the Baltimore community around social enterprises. And I would say 10 years ago, maybe a little more generous, 15 years ago, the idea of social enterprises in Baltimore were massive institutions like your Catholic Charities or your Goodwill. And there was this growing movement of like, no, there are new startups that are embracing mission that also need space in the marketplace. And, you know, as those folks were getting going, the ecosystem wasn't necessarily ready for that, right? It was either you're a for-profit, especially in the tech, life science in Baltimore had a good history of advertising in the dot-com era, right? It's like we were still living on the legacies of that with the eds and meds, and then a ton of nonprofits. This idea of coming in the middle and doing mission-based work in a financially sustainable manner really started growing this tent essentially in the last 10 to 15 years. We watched the Social Enterprise Alliance came to Baltimore, had a chapter here around that same time. Impact Hub with Rodney Foxworth and Michelle Geisis were organizing things, breakfasts around that time. I would say, you know, 5, 6 years ago when Innovation Works got going, what we had on the ground was a robust group of entrepreneurs driving that mission. There were a number of accelerator programs, incubator programs that were being launched to focus specifically on those, especially from our university programs and some other community-based programs. The challenge, I would say, was that a lot of these programs were just like for a fixed period of time. It's a 4-month program here and a 6-month program here, and then you graduate, right? And then you go back, as I say, in the Wild Wild West to go find the money to do all the things you just learned in the accelerator program. And folks are looking at you like, I'm sorry, what? You want to do poverty alleviation? You want to solve problems for hunger? There's already a massive institution that's already doing that called Catholic Charities. What are you going to do differently, right? And this was a thing that was happening that, you know, that folks were wrestling with. I helped launch a similar program called Elevation Awards at Baltimore Core at the time. That was also doing that, give folks a chance to explore their idea. And then once they explore their idea and they want to do it, it's like, now where are the resources, right? So Innovation Works, the unique element there is that we are not a stage-based program. We are stage agnostic. So you come to us an idea scale, a scale stage, and we want to have you in a network where you continue to receive resources for as long as you want to be in relationship with us. It's designed that way. And then we built a number of assets within that system to support them and then partner with other organizations for other things. Part of the assets that we designed internally was the capital system, Ignite Capital.
Right.
You can't tell folks to go do mission work and not find mission-friendly capital to support the work that they're doing. So Ignite Capital was born out of that in March of 2020 of all times. We launched a fund as the pandemic was picking up. But it's been a good 4.5 years of testing out this new model in Baltimore and trying to help social enterprises get capitalized. I'll stop there for now. That's the backstory.
No, I think that's great. And I want to, we're going to dig in more on nitty gritty stuff. But I think before we do that, I'd like to know if there's an example of, you know, you talked about the social enterprises needing also capital that was aligned with what they're doing. Is there an example of one of those social enterprises? Like, what did that graduation look like for them when they were able, once Ignite Capital came into the picture?
Yeah. So the good news, so I'll give you maybe 1 or 2 really fast examples. On the super early startup side, we have an organization called Lift and Labels. The founder is a former preacher, former insurance executive that was working in the prison systems as a chaplain who wanted to employ returning citizens who had been working in the Maryland correctional sewing plants to help them get sewing jobs outside of the prison system to actually pay them a livable wage so they can put those same skills to work after doing 20-year sentences working in the sewing factory for 20 years, right? But the challenge was I kept applying for a bunch of foundation grants, and the foundations are saying, you don't exist yet. We can't give you a grant for anything, right? Go prove a case first. So we went through our accelerator program, came on the back end of it. And, you know, in this case, it was like a very small investment. I think the first check was like $25,000, right? And it was go get equipment, go hire some folks, pay them to train them, get some materials, build some products, and then get out there and sell, right? It was that simple. as a starting point. And then as it got into the market and started making some sales, then we did a line of credit that it can use to draw upon as they're like looking at particular faith-based groups who want to do stoles or whatever the case may be. So now they have a small loan plus a line of credit on top of it. And then we go upstream to the coffee shop cafe chain that also has products in Trader Joe's stores, right? When it first came to us, it was to expand from one small location to another location. And then they put in a bid to become the new main cafe at the at Penn Station in Baltimore, the train station, the main train hub. Dunkin' Donuts is out. This local cafe is going to be in, an opportunity to create 20 more jobs or whatever the case may be. And it's like, oh crap, we need a bigger space to manufacture our products and bag our coffees. So our capital went in to help them get a facility. Now talking about like reinvigorating communities, you go to a community that has a bunch of commercial assets sitting around. You're like, all right, go do it there. And then Trader Joe's comes and expands their store footprint by another 40 stores. All right. And it's like, oh, I need more money. And it's like, okay, now there's a line of credit to go with the stores while you're holding on to debt for that space that you needed and you're sitting on until the train station's commercial redevelopment is done. So it's just playing with the different structures and tools out there to meet the need of the moment, right? So they're not sitting on long-term debt unnecessarily, and they were being responsive to their needs right away. Those are two examples on two different ends of the scale.
Yeah, I love that compare and contrast there. I want to kick it over next to Kevin Jones from Neighborhood Economics for some follow-ups here.
Yeah. Jay, I love the way you didn't start a fund. A fund was the answer to the problem that you had stepped into, reminds me of the time I was dancing on quicksand and decided, to leave. You get in and you need to move quickly before, it comes up your ankles. And tell me about, I know the Santa Clara accelerator is regarded as one of the best in the world. My friend Matt Flannery, bumped out of 6 different accelerator programs with Kiva, which came on to be, 150 million a year at $25 for microfinance lending. And he was never able to do what he would call a creme brulee presentation, where it's hard on top but weak in the middle, until he got into Santa Clara and figured out how to make it a really good pie. And so he launched in it, 150 million a year. It's a good thing. He's on to his mobile bank. But what was it about that methodology of helping entrepreneurs, and where capital is just applied like it's a medicine when you need it, as opposed to a solutions line up for it?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Funny, I'm supposed to be in Miller Center next week, right before SoCap. And every year I go, I'm reminded again of why we're in partnership with them, right?
Yeah.
Is that they have this amazing curriculum tool, right? That goes to the depths that I've never seen anywhere else, and the types of tools they give entrepreneurs to help solve day-to-day challenges, templates and financial models and things. And they're constantly refining those based on the feedback they're receiving from the entrepreneurs. Their executive mentor network is pretty amazing, right?
It is.
A bunch of retired or active entrepreneurs up and down the valley who are up and down the bay, who are or just volunteering their time pro bono, right? To help these families think through critical challenges. While they didn't have a fund at that time, they do now. They were connected to this wide web of co-investors that they would invite to Central University to hear from these entrepreneurs. Those are some of the unique things that we saw that were really, really nice to replicate here in Baltimore. Now we have to put our own little spin on it, because Santa Clara University and the Miller Center program is working primarily in the Global South. So they have a particular place that they're focusing on. They're selecting entrepreneurs from a broad set of places and bringing them together in community through their programs. But because we are in one place, it was a lot easier for us to, one, recruit our own network in Baltimore. Now we have about 115 folks up and down the Baltimore area who are serving as pro bono mentors. And then when we do our accelerator programs, we take one Baltimore mentor and one Santa Clara mentor pair them together to match to one entrepreneur for 6 months, right?
Wow.
I mean, it's pretty cool to still be doing that 5-6 years later. We are still using that same curriculum. We've refined some pieces of it for Baltimore, and then we just hand it right back to Miller Center for their library. They refine stuff, they give it to us for our library. And then we now have Weave and Impact, which is ran by Pamela Russo, the former chief community officer for Miller Center, who's trying to replicate the joint model from Miller Center and Innovation Works to other places, starting in Chicago, and I think looking next in San Bernardino, perhaps, is the next place. So the idea is that we're going to stay focused on Baltimore because we have enough challenges in Baltimore. Jay's not interested in anywhere else. We'll partner on how we can extend our lessons learned to other places on top of it.
Wow, that's what. So does Pamela and the folks in Chicago, you still get access to the amazing talent from the Valley?
Yeah, it's all a tri-partnership at this point. We're sharing mentors, we're sharing curriculum, we're sharing work. The limited thing we can't share is fund, right? Folks who put money in capital care about Baltimore, they want to stay in Baltimore.
Right. Sure.
Similar to Miller Center, so we have to figure what that looks like over time.
Yeah. Wow. If somebody, I'm in an entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Western North Carolina. We've been impacted by this recent storm. Swannanoa, my community, is the most impacted. We were on the cover of the front page of the New York Times and the Post the first week, and this guy Donald Trump was there on Monday because our devastation is so picturesque. It is such a story of devastation. And we're trying to see about bringing it back and channeling the aid money to beyond the usual suspects. Our rubric is, look for caterers. They don't have a bucket to get money, whereas the Restaurant Association has an association. They're a line item in the relief money and then the aid money. But we've got a hodgepodge of an ecosystem. The folks coming out of the chamber want tech enabled. Other folks, we're doing friends and family funding for entrepreneurs without a rich uncle. How would you, and there's no Baltimore is a thing. Asheville is a tourist creation with a lot of other things around it. I wonder how we would emulate your model here.
Yeah, I mean, so I will say this, when I think about the broader, so there's our own mini ecosystem, Innovation Works with Ignite Capital, with a mentor network and a co-investor network and all these things that we're building into this machine, really to support the social entrepreneurs that are in our system and in our network. Then there's the broader ecosystem around us. The one thing I will say about the broader ecosystem is, Baltimore is a city that is just small enough and just big enough to have multiple personalities, right? We're not one story. We have an amazing arts institution that pumps a bunch of creatives into the market from a talent standpoint. Some of them become founders, and we have a really, really robust creative economy. We have eds and meds. So we have a lot of life science and technology startups that are spinning up every single day. We have a lot of social challenges. So social entrepreneurship becomes a big hotbed, right?
Right.
A lot of main streets, given the bones of a historic city. And we have a huge main street organized body. What was already working, fueled by the pandemic, was this idea of collaboration across the board, right? You need things like GBC tech hubs to force everybody to the same table to go play with each other because you got to get the national money, right?
What is the GBC tech hub?
All right, the tech hub from the federal sector, and our local GBC is our business economy development organization. And organizing us around this, let's go get this national resource, but we need everyone at the table. So national money coming in has been a forcing factor that just fueled what was already happening from a grassroots standpoint. We have working groups across different silos, like the creatives have the group and the small business folks have a group, and we all know each other. That's the beauty of Baltimore for me, is that what once was little fiefdoms in different places have now really and there's news talking about all. And that's good for Baltimore because, there's this danger in a single story of a place, right?
Right.
Get ourselves out of that. And, and it's allowing us to have more robust conversations. Today in my board meeting, somebody said, well, we have Ignite Capital and we have CDFIs. and the CDFIs are going to grow, and then we're going to grow. Is there a time where we just like start clashing? And we're like, no. You may need a fund specifically for the creatives.
Right.
Because there's a very unique flavor in how they do business that the CDFI will not understand.
Yeah.
Right. So the more we give name to these things, the more we can think more creatively about how to really tailor resources to these specific types of sector. And that's what I get excited about when I talk about creative capital. It's how do you like really get deep and get to know people, rebuild an enable economy, and the capital needed for that is very different than launching a tech company.
Yeah. It sounds like what I'm hearing from you, like the lesson to learn, because I'm also here in Asheville, is and I moved here from Detroit 10 years ago. And what you're saying about Baltimore, there's a lot of resonance with Detroit. It was so dependent on one industry, the auto industry, for so long, and in a lot of ways, the region still is. But the rebirth of it has really come from a diversification. You know, there's arts, there's tech, there's it's a much the new Detroit is much more diversified in what types of businesses are there. And Asheville has been, up until this point at least, an incredibly siloed tourism economy. We don't really have anything else besides tourism. And so people are fleeing here because, you talk about downstream stuff. My wife is a manager for a company that cleans Airbnbs, because Airbnbs are such, we have a higher density of Airbnbs than anywhere else in the country by like double the second place. So there are companies that just go out there and clean Airbnbs. They are another one, like those caterers or like those downline people. There might be something out there for the hotels, and the hotels have the money, but it's these small kind of support businesses that are in that ecosystem that are really suffering the most. I am curious because one of the solutions and one of the kind of awesome things that came out of the rebirth in Detroit is a lot more focus on local investing, and it's still small in a way, but the ability there to actually have non-accredited folks, just regular people who want to put some of their retirement savings away into their local economy, avenues and ways for them to do that there. And I'm curious about what efforts you guys have done already and what you guys are looking to do as far as allowing the community to invest into these funds that then get reinvested back into their local businesses.
Yeah, talk about lessons learned in our first fund. When we launched it, we had this idea that, based on some legal advice that I didn't challenge hard enough because I didn't know what I was doing, was that we were going to create a participation pool for non-accredited investors where you can put your money in as a participation pool, but you cannot earn an interest on it. So our first fund offered a 2% product and a 0% product. 0% product was for non-accredited investors, and the 2% product was for accredited investors. Then I go out, try to talk to my friends, and they're like, you want me to give you my money for 10 years at 0% interest? I am still trying to figure out how to build wealth for myself. That was right. Right? So we really didn't take any money from any non-accredited folks. It was all accredited folks across 0 and 2% for the first fund. We're actually going to we're finalizing the terms of our second fund. We're going to go to market in Q1 of next year. And what we've now done is we're offering the accredited folks 2% and 4%. The market has shifted a little bit. And we are actually carving out a portion of that fund to offer community notes to non-accredited investors with a minimum investment of $1,000, and they get 6%.
Sorry, could you say that again? It kind of cut out.
They get 6% instead of accredited
folks. Wow. Yeah.
1, 2, and 4, and then the unaccredited folks would get 6% instead, and actually only have to do a 5-year term as opposed to 10-year terms for their
right.
As a way of like saying
they have less money, so the money matters more to them. That's just the way to do it. Ujima is doing something similar with that kind of finding ways to get the community in where the people without money feel good about that they're winning too. It's a pretty interesting thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And for whatever it's worth, we actually borrow that model from our friends at Boston Impact Initiative, because they also in their fund too.
Exactly. Yeah. We're all borrowing from Boston Impact, I think. That's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it looks like we were able to be joined here by our one of our panelists. Michael was able to join us. Michael, thanks for being here. I'm glad you're able to get in today. I wanted to let you jump in the conversation wherever you best see fit.
Yeah, no, I'm just listening, and thank you, Jay, for coming today. And I apologize. I was held prisoner at a doctor's office against my will. Um, but one question I have is, have you figured out a way to make some of your funding applicable to some of the specific problems that have happened since the bridge went down,
Mm,
as a sort of big national tragedy?
Not our fund specifically. So because of where the bridge is located in the southeast corner of the city and across into the county on the other side, um, our neighborhood strategy. So we support entrepreneurs across the city, and then we have various neighborhoods that we focus on specifically as well, from a economy rebuilding standpoint, right? So we have some resources and deeper relationships in those communities. So the southeast corridor of the city where the bridge was connected to the most, there's actually an active CDFI working in that market already, right? That's very place-based in that area. And their director of lending is on my investment committee. We're friends. And it was just like, hey, that's your backyard. And it's the Latino Economic Development Fund. And a lot of the businesses in that part of town were Latino-led businesses. It was like, hey, these are your folks. If you need my help, let me know, but you need to focus on that part of the work. And then crossing into the county, we also have a limitation there. So it really required I'm on the committee for impact investing at Baltimore Community Foundation. So there's a bunch of other work that's happening between the Baltimore Community Foundation, other philanthropy groups to pull resources together. And then there's an RFP out right now for anyone working in those communities to be able to get resources to support businesses and individuals. We are not applying because it's just way too far out of our own reach from a geographic standpoint. But there are massive efforts with a bunch of millions of dollars on the table going towards that, which I'm really proud of because Baltimore stepped up in a good way.
Yeah, that's
mm,
great. So another question that I had is sort of if you had a wave a magic wand with public policy. So you got a new governor recently. You're probably going to get, some new state legislators in November. Uh, One of the things that we've seen is that in the state of Michigan, there is near passage an investment tax credit for people who put money into funds like yours. And I wonder if that or other ideas for how to leverage things more successfully in Maryland have been in the discussion at all.
Yeah, we hosted I told Kevin about this a while back, a conference similar to the Economics Lab, but only for Baltimore a couple of months ago. And a lot of that there was a conversation around policy and some recommendations that came out of that. If I had a magic wand right now, there are probably two that I would pursue right away. One is just we need more data transparency in all the different state-supported lending activities that are happening around the city.
mm,
A lot of the activity, we don't have data to the zip code level of where those businesses are and or demographics of the leaders of those small businesses that are being supported, right?
mhm.
You have a lot of data around how much is happening in lending, but nobody wants to talk about what parts of town they're going in and who
Right.
primarily are benefiting from that. We need better transparency around that. Can't really convince the private sector to do that, right? But if you're taking public money, you should be held accountable to that. That's the one thing, right? That includes all places where public money is going, from the tech sector to small businesses to CDFIs or whatever the case may be. Another one is more of a personal, I wouldn't call it a beef, a personal exploration or inquiry right now, is we are not a CDFI. We chose not to go down that road in year one. It was just too much work. I don't need to be one to do mission-based lending. We may consider it at one point. We have to decide yes or no, do we want to? But in speaking to like housing and community development about the resources that they've established for lenders. So there's a guarantee pool for lenders. You can
Right.
state to lend to small businesses. I asked, hey, can we tap into that? And they said, well, you're not a CDFI. I'm like, does the law say I have to be a CDFI? Or is it a practice where you thought it had to be a CDFI because the field has changed quite a bit, actually? So it seems to be like a lot of re-education is happening around how CDFIs are not the only pathway to capital, right? There are other types of entities that are deploying capital. And this is an ongoing conversation now with that agency around, let's get back to the letter of the law. What is it? Or do we need to start shifting practice and thinking about what that may look like because your language on your website may need to shift?
Yeah, you're being
Right.
you're being far too generous, because I think that many CDFIs have tight risk profiles that make them very limited in what they can do in distressed communities, and you're taking bigger risks, so you should be first in line.
That's a very fair argument that I will buy and also and I will say one of the reasons we chose not to be a CDFI in the beginning was in our 1 year listening period. Most folks didn't know who the CDFI were. If they did, they had a reason why they were not approaching the CDFI. But whether it was the right reason or not, there was just a lack of trust to some extent.
Yeah.
It was like, why take on the brand that people are having a challenge with if you want to do something different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or we hear things like, yeah, the credit check. Oh, yeah, they wanted a personal guarantee. Or yeah, they wanted a collateral on stuff that I barely have. Because when we came out, we said no credit check, no personal guarantees, no collateral.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, if you're going to go down the road and do those things, then don't call yourself a CDFI because you're going to get confused immediately. So that's part of the reasons why we didn't become one right away, a branding thing.
Yeah, there's so much to say about that. You know, it's a useful thing, and you can get things like tax credit dollars into your real estate if you're a CDFI. But you don't have to act like a CDFI. I mean, we're working with a consortium of CDFIs here in Asheville that are lightweight and only will give us the services we want and not be an empire building kind of thing. And there are some other CDFIs we're working with who are really effective, but you become, you know, part of their empire and you become subsumed. And I think there are CDFIs who are realizing lightweight is better and people won't really hate us. And they don't hate CDFIs. They're just finding it to be a persistent aggravation. You know, it's a, and so, but I've got working with somebody who is doing, well, Stephanie is working, Swepson Twitty at Eagle Market Streets is becoming a real estate focused CDFI, but then you have to bundle $30 million deals to make it work together. You have to start working at scale. And so, you know, CDFIs, they're not capable of reform because they're the easiest place that governments go to put money. And that's why we're working with them. We will have tens and hundreds of millions in relief and development in Western North Carolina. And we're working with folks who don't want to camp out on the flow, but will help us parse it. So it's, and that's just my experience of it. I've also, you know, become a cloned puppet of a CDFI on one project. I was surprised to know that that's what I was. Okay, I'm call me Mr. Oompa Loompa, you know, whatever. Anyway, long riff, but really agreeing with your approach.
I appreciate that.
Kevin, I don't think you look anything like an Oompa Loompa, just for the record.
You know, it's a makeup thing. You know, you gotta, you gotta put the lenses on. We had some questions. I think Amy Short's hand was up.
Yeah, let's kick it over here. Let me see. Amy, if you want to go ahead and unmute, love to hear your question.
Yeah. Thanks. No question. Just applauding and cheering Jay on.
Yeah. Okay. Are you also in the Baltimore area?
I am. Okay. It's really refreshing to have a governor that doesn't actively hate the city of Baltimore, and miracles are possible as a result.
Yeah.
Agree to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious, like, if someone were to ask you on the macro, like if you wanted to try to sum up the impact that the Innovation Works and then the Ignite Capital have had. Do you guys track numbers on that? Like, can you say with kind of what the results of what you've done so far have been, and what you're projecting that you're going to be able to do in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. So our first fund, again, we're about 4.5 years into this 10-year note, and we'll launch fund 2 next year.
How big is the fund again? I want to make sure.
Sorry, the first fund we've oversubscribed. We're done on that. It was a test fund of $4 million. We've raised it. We have deployed 2/3 of it already, and probably will go into our last 15 months of deployment on that fund. Hence the new fund coming up in Q1 of 2025. And that the next fund we're sizing at 15 million, and that's blended capital, philanthropy, and notes. And quite frankly, they're like, that's a lot of money. I'm like, yeah, but you can just do it once and get it over with. And because of the type of businesses that we're investing in, we don't need to raise a fund 3 or fund 4. That's a lot of money to get a lot of Main Street businesses and some scalable ones in there to go in. And the more we can worry about the less we can worry about raising money, the more we can focus on our work, right? So just get it out. That's the
you know, you are the least capital focused fund I think I've talked to in a while, and it's kind of interesting because capital solves a problem, but it's not your goal. You know, I've raised funds, and it felt good to have a big bunch of money. Hey, look at us, you know, and other times we didn't get there. But, I mean, you know, you're not capital centric, and that's a really interesting approach.
I joke to folks, I'm not a finance guy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, capital is a tool amongst a broader toolkit. My background is in industrial organizational psychology and some engineering and math.
Cool.
Right. So I'm more about people and systems. How do you get people and systems moving in alignment? And there's a toolkit that can help do that. Money is only about one small piece of it, right? So speaking of the impact, yeah, we're going to measure those. So we do annual surveys across the Innovation Works network and then the Ignite Capital portfolio companies as well. And we're tracking things that we believe are good indicators of potential economic growth, both for the entrepreneurs and for Baltimore City itself.
Can you go back and do that iconic statement? You just said that we're trying to move things and capital's a small part. Say that again. That's something.
We're trying to shift an economy, and we're trying to close the racial wealth gap. To do that,
right?
Capital is a big but small part of the equation. Like, you need a lot of capital, but a lot of capital itself is not going to get us there. You need community trust. You need state assets that actually work, and landlords you can get access to put buildings to work, right? You need a functioning government. You need an entrepreneurial city with a good ecosystem, because without any of those things, capital just sitting on the sidelines isn't going to get us anywhere. So that's my argument.
Wow.
And then on the impact measurement side, you know, the number of entrepreneurs we're supporting is great. How much money we're deploying is great. But if they're not leading us to job creation,
right,
the impact that those enterprises intended to have on their communities, we have to be mindful of, right? We can create a bunch of jobs, and then we just create a bunch of products that people in the communities can't afford. And that's not really helping anyone, right? So we want to be mindful of those things and support our entrepreneurs and how they are quantifying their own impact and telling their own stories alongside the job creation. And we actually measure job creation and sustaining by full-time job, part-time job, and contractor jobs, because the broad base of the jobs are contractors, especially for startups. And then you hopefully transition into part-time and then full-time where you can get benefits, but it's a haul to get there. And if we're only looking at full-time jobs, we'd miss a whole bunch of folks that are being supported without that. So we're mindful of that. We're mindful of demographics of who those employees are and the board of advisors of those companies. Like, who's advising you, and who are you supporting secondarily through your job creation?
Right.
And you livable wage. We don't invest in any business that does not pay at least $15 an hour. We're trying to get that at 20. I'd rather invest more. The talent guy in me says, you're just going to have a talent problem anyway if you don't pay enough.
Right.
So this is paid up front.
Exactly.
And just get it out of the way.
Yeah.
You sustain your business.
Would you be interested in, you know, consulting with us? Because we're mapping all the funds and the incoming funds. We got a college kids doing that, and at Warren Wilson, and we're got the consortium of CDFI saying, you know, we'll go one step below the accepted subjects or whatever, to caterers who are not self-organized. But then, then we have to look at coalescing the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and there isn't one here really. And it would be interesting, maybe you and Michael come down for 4 or 5 days and talk about what could happen.
I'm always interested in being a good friend. I can't take on any more jobs, so maybe not consult.
Yeah, no, this would just be coming down and telling your story about how you built what you build, and maybe give us some guidelines to how we could build something. I don't know. It's just a vague request, but I think I would like a lot more people to hear you down here.
I appreciate that. And sorry, I mentioned this on the impacts. So let me mention one other thing. We actually have a consultant that we're working with right now to revise our impact measurement framework, because when we started, a lot of it had to do with these things like how much money have you deployed, and maybe how many jobs did they create,
right?
People are you supporting? But if the goal really is to reduce the racial wealth gap and grow neighborhood economies, other indicators that we're not looking at right now, we want to get a better handle on that. So some of that, if you're going to work in specific neighborhoods, right? How can we index our data set against the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicator Alliance is collecting data on neighborhoods, right? To see if our entrepreneurs are shifting the economy at a faster rate than the broader neighborhood around them, right? That starts looking at like median income per household, right? Of the entrepreneurs versus every other household in that neighborhood.
Right.
Start looking at like business value, both combination of investments in those businesses and revenue of those businesses.
Right.
We need both to tell the story, right? You are attracting investment,
right?
You're actually making revenue, right? What does the data tell us around the value of the homes in the neighborhood? Right? We want to help incentivize growth without displacing folks, but there are data sets we can benchmark against that we're currently not doing. Because if you don't do that, then we're just in an echo chamber celebrating our own successes, but not knowing if it actually is making any impact or not. And we want to be mindful of that.
Man, I really like that. And it sounds like when you kind of put it all together in that way, it sounds like what you're doing is you're sort of building a really strong, at least, buffer against gentrification as you are doing the economic development in those communities.
Absolutely. And I will say that one thing that doesn't show up on paper that I'm really, really proud, probably is going to be one of the best things we do, quite frankly, is the weaving of an intentional network of mission-minded entrepreneurs in a way that they can rely on each other long-term. Love our mentors, but long-term, you need peer mentorship, you need peer advisory, you need folks who can count on each other, and sometimes take away the power dynamic where it's like, oh, the rich guy in the county is mentoring me on how to do the thing in West Baltimore, when I can live in West Baltimore and mentor a small business in my own neighborhood because I support that same small business every day. Like long-term, we need to get to a place where we start shifting the dynamics of what that community of entrepreneurs mean for each other. And that's trust, that's community, that's saying, hey, you're not competitors, you're collaborators. And how can we help you maintain that spirit? And there's a lot around culture shaping that we have to be mindful of too.
Yeah, I love that. We do have a question from the audience here asking if there's any connection with the Obron Cooperative Network.
Yes, when they were starting in Baltimore, but they're not as focused in Baltimore now. So, I mean, this idea around like worker co-ops or like acquiring businesses from folks who are leaving their business is a topic that I keep hearing everywhere. I don't know how much it's picked up in Baltimore, quite frankly. And it's one of those areas where like there's another niche of business that you have to creatively finance. I know like New Majority Capital is working on that nationally, and so I don't know that we've really made the inroads in that space in Baltimore City specifically. The co-op movement is finally figuring out how to capitalize co-ops, and that's thanks to the work that the folks here are doing with a national fund, right? And it just feels like you have these niche things, but not all of them are being supported in the same way. So Obron, yes, but in Baltimore, that model has not picked up as well as I would have loved to see it pick up.
Yeah, I actually just got to have some folks on my show where we were talking about Jenny Everett and Mark Hand, who were doing democracy collaborative labs around how they can solve those problems of funding, democratically owned businesses. And it's really, really cool stuff right now. I want to let Kevin and Michael, any other questions you guys have here that you wanted to make sure that we got asked?
The only other question that I have is, so Kevin rather informally suggested you come to North Carolina and share your wisdom. Do you have a more organized structure for others to learn from you? Do you do webinars? Do you do consulting?
Not consulting. I talk too much. I'm always saying yes to talking and anything that I get invited to because I think it is good to share Baltimore story in that process, right? So nothing more formal as we think long term about how we help innovation works and or Ignite Capital become more sustainable from a financing standpoint. Those things may become an option, like consulting arms and things like that. But for right now, this is me being extremely, maybe too focused on my own good sometimes. You're in a community of entrepreneurs, you're figuring out a capital system for them. You're trying to figure out how to help integrate them into neighborhoods to rebuild economies. Like just do those things well.
Right, right.
Just focus. Yeah.
And one other question is, do you feel like as this work has unfolded, you've been able to develop a good working list of people in Baltimore who are really interested in this local investment ecosystem so that you can, begin to use those names for multiple purposes?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm interpreting your question correctly. So there is this idea of how do we get more individuals to participate in the investment ecosystem, right? The foundations, the public sector, like we know what we can get from those systems and they have websites and all that stuff. But in Baltimore, there's a lot of funds sitting in personal resources, right? That are not behind these giant systems. My sense is that a lot of folks don't necessarily have the appetite for doing one-on-one direct investments into businesses because they don't have the patience to like follow that thing and like help. Like they would rather invest in a thing that them and their friends are maybe already investing, put money into a fund and the fund invests on their behalf. A lot of folks just don't have the patience. And I see it in our mentor network, right? Folks are like, can I just make a donation to them? I don't want to like invest in them because then I have to follow it, right? I think there's just something around how do you, even in our own co-investor network, we try to aggregate capital from other spaces to come alongside our capital. We've had the most successes with venture funds, CDFIs, foundations, right? Not individuals, even though we have a bunch of mentors in our network who probably could be an investor. But it's a different level of one-on-one engagement and relationship you have to have with those people to get them to think about the best way to do it. And I don't know that we've taken the time to build what those parameters are. Like he was great, but $25 at a time, you need somebody who's like, I need to put in $10,000 into a business. What's the best way for me to do that? And do I do that online? What does that mean? I think a lot of folks who have the resources are struggling with the current tools that we have around crowdfunding and online platforms. It's just not a place their mind goes right away. It has to be relational. And it has to be a business they've built a relationship with before they even go to that far of putting their money down. I think that's still something that needs to be solved for.
Well, the cultural norm is you're a limited partner and there's a general partner, and the general partner takes action and you win or lose. That's the engaged local capital is I don't see it. I think it's an interesting thing. And maybe we'll see more of it. That's interesting. And Michael, are you seeing average people actually stepping up and caring about this business and and taking action, or just give it to a fund and don't, I'm through thinking about it?
Yeah, so I don't think this happens spontaneously. So, but I do, and it is true that a lot of people who park money in funds are doing so to reduce their work and attention span. But I do think that funds, and some of the ones we've talked to, do this maybe not in as concerted a way as they could, but a little bit of where if someone is investing in the fund, you also send out nudges for people to be consumers in the fund and to
Right. Sure.
bring their friends involved in this. And I think, Jay, given what you talk about, which I think is a great objective of building a network of mentors, is they
Yeah.
also can and should be part of this. Policy people who have an interest in this. So I just feel like all of these individuals have multiple skills, and if one can build a good working list of this, you can call upon them for multiple purposes over time. But you got to start somewhere. So I appreciate the limits of what you're doing right now.
Yeah, I want to pick up
Yeah.
Carl's question from the chat. With regard to our investors, what portion are from within the community, from outside the community? It's oddly enough with Fund One. In hindsight, I thought we had a crazy idea offering 0% and 2% notes. Come to find out, people are just doing it in philanthropic capital across the country. We thought it was just like, just try to sell it in Baltimore. And if you can do it there, stay there. So all of Fund One was local.
Right.
100%. Oh, sorry, I take that back. I'm sorry. The American Baptist Mission Society out of New Jersey was a participant. That was the only non-local. But Fund Two, with that size that I just talked about, there has to be outside fund money.
Right.
There's no choice about that. So, yeah, I'll be a SoCap next week shopping next year, because we have to bring resources to Baltimore to complement Baltimore's resources for the next week.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'll see you there. That's great. That's pretty funny. Your approach is so unique and interesting in that, you know, it is ecosystem with capital solving the problem that the community finds itself in. There's really, you know, this has been adapted 3 times, right? I mean, you adapted it from Santa Clara, Pamela Roussos is adapting it. The adaptability of this thing is a real beautiful thing. I'd just love to, I wonder how we could explore that more.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think definitely getting on a call with Pamela and like see what she's thinking as she's thinking about this model.
Yeah.
I will call out that the one observation that I've made is that when we think about adaptability, there's a model in Baltimore, but then to take that model in Baltimore anywhere else, you have to assess every piece of the model.
Yep.
Determine what pieces of it are needed in a new market, not all of it necessarily, right? Because you go into a market that's pretty flush with cash, you may not need another fund, right?
Right.
You need other resources to help support folks, right? Or, you know, I will say that, you know, Ignite Capital Innovation Works, we're not closing the ratio of capital $15 million. I can guarantee you that, right? But it is how we take our funds and figure out creative partnerships with the public sector to leverage other capital that otherwise would flow anyway.
Yeah. Just figuring out what the adaptability of that approach is, you know, what are there's got to be some steps that you start with in your assessment of the ecosystem. There's things we can learn, I know.
Absolutely. And that's what Pamela's leading, is like the assessment of an ecosystem, what must be present for this model to be able to take root, what is not necessary. That's a whole process that Pamela has on her end that we can definitely dig into.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jay. I know you got a hard out, and just wanted to say thank you. Everyone, make sure to go check out Impact Capital and the innovation. What is it here? I'm forgetting the name.
Innovation Works.
Innovation Works, yeah. And you can watch this replay of this episode as well as the backstock of all the other funds that we have talked with on our YouTube channel, which is the Mindful Marketplace Show, our YouTube channel, and then also that it gets reposted and all the events get announced over on the Main Street Journal. So really, I would just subscribe to Neighborhood Economics newsletter, subscribe to Main Street Journal newsletter, subscribe to the Mindful Marketplace Show wherever you get your podcasts. And we will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for your time. Take care of yourself and make sure to take care of someone else out there too.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. This was really interesting. I learned a lot. Thank you.